DougDoug is a challenge-based Twitch streamer, whose most well-known joke is probably either rigged, the believers versus the doubters, or, of course, Doug being bad at 2D platformers. And I've been with Doug for a long time. I watched him back when he focused solely on those playing games with only your voice challenge videos. I made a Twitch account solely to watch the guy. And, of course, I've seen him play 2D platformers on many occasions. Now, a big part of the joke is that it's very much in contention, where Doug constantly claims that he's good at platformer games and tries to do bigger and bigger things to prove it, only to fall short while the rest of chat claims their grandmother's ashes fell over and just completed a jump that he failed. But is Doug bad at 2D platformers?
What is going on here? Oh.
Yes, he is. But is he really?
What are you talking about, man? What are you doing here?
No! I fucking fuck! Why isn't he closer? He should be farther to the left. All these levels suck ass.
Put money on Believe, man. This is okay. I really... Believers, I'm sorry. I am going insane. I can't do this level.
Fucking...
Why?
70.
That didn't work. Then I blew up the block I was supposed to jump on.
How do I leave? How do you leave the car? I pressed all the buttons!
Yes, he is. But I want to actually see the numbers behind it. I mean, if the believers are the flat earthers of the DougDoug community, then where's the harm in finding the science, right? So just like with my Magic the Noah video, I want to go through several of DougDoug's VODs and count up every time he dies, including what caused it and whether it was his fault or not, to get the numbers behind whether Doug is bad at 2D platformers and why. Or maybe even learn along the way that we're the wrong one. Wrong ones, and then get burned alive at the stake like all those Roman philosophers of the time that knew too much. So, is DougDoug bad at 2D platformers? So much like the Magic the Noah video, I genuinely made this giant sheet filled with data. So if you want to give it a look, I'll have it down in the description for you. And much like that video, I have some special terms and things I need to talk about so we're on the same page. First of all, I decided to chart down the following things during my research. VOD for what stream it was, timestamp for where in the stream, game for what game. However, the more meaty stuff and information is over here. What killed DougDoug dictates what exactly killed him. Spikes, a Koopa, lava, failing the challenge, a specific item or thing. Reasonably avoidable is made to dictate, at the very least compared to the average platformer fan, if they would have been able to avoid dying if DougDoug just handed the controller to the average player. By having this here, we can kind of weed out those deaths caused by really bullshit circumstances like those pixel perfect levels, death doors, levels where there's just no reaction time, and things like that. Because those are the kinds of levels that DougDoug tries to use to say that he's not actually bad at 2D platformers, he's just unlucky. Though occasionally in the sheet itself, you may see intentional death, which is specifically for when he literally couldn't do anything else and had to die, like certain forms of soft lock, or if he was just testing a thing really quickly. But within this video itself, there isn't really much distinction between those and just a straight no, a average fan could not complete that. But if you are interested in that, that's in the sheet. So the other category used to weed out the more bullshit deaths to better determine his actual skill is was DougDoug distracted, which is meant to weed out those times when things outside of the game distracted him, like a really weird TTS message, the code breaking, something with the challenge, or just other circumstances that aren't within the game and thus shouldn't be used to determine his skill. By using these, we can have both a total death counter and a pure death counter that determines his actual skill. Deniialism is anything Doug says shortly before or after a death, which I chart to see just how often he blames the game versus the times when he actually admits fault in a death versus just saying beans really loudly.
Beans.
Description is pretty self-explanatory, just extra context on the circumstances around the death, but repeat death is the main thing that I want to sit down and talk about, so we both kind of understand what I mean when I'm saying a repeat death. This is of course for when Doug dies again to a thing, but I want to clarify specifically what constitutes that. Like if Doug dies to a Goomba in 1-1 and then dies to a Goomba in 1-2, that's obviously not a repeat, nor is dying to a different enemy within that same level or anything. A repeat death is explicitly for when Doug dies to the same thing under the same circumstances. So for it to be a repeat, in this example, it has to specifically be that 1-1 Goomba again. Otherwise, that's not a repeat death. When it comes to non-living things like spikes though, where there isn't like a clear distinction between where the spikes end and begin and what should count as a different section and not a repeat death, I tried to do it within like reasonable chunks and sections of a level, and sticking more to the logic of if he is dying because of the same mistake, then it counts as a repeat. So like if in Celeste he's dying to spikes, there's a distinction between like the spikes on the lower level that constitute the entire level versus the spikes that are like on the walls or something. So these would be the same, these would not. Lastly, we also have was he playing epic music, but I won't really be touching on that one much, because although an occasional aspect of the joke is that DougDoug will play epic music that somehow makes him better at the game, I tried to, as a joke, see if there was any kind of correlation or if I could prove he gets worse at the game when he plays epic music or something. However, I just wasn't able to find anything because of the 10 streams I watched, he just didn't play Storyteller much. He only played it like twice, I want to say. So that is on the sheet, but I won't be able to bring it up much within the data. So then, with that out of the way, let's start looking into that data. First things first, what does Doug die most to? Well, just to get out of the way, obviously our first and second place are spikes and pits, given that literally every single platformer game where you can die has them in some form, no matter the game. Doug, within the 10 VODs, died to spikes a total of 256 times, with only 19 of them being due to factors outside of his control, at around 7% of deaths not being his fault, with spikes in particular making up a whopping 34.5% of his total death count and 43% of his pure death count. Pits lag quite behind that, but are still a momentous 109 deaths, 27 of which weren't his fault, making up around 25% of his deaths and only 15% when only lined up against pure deaths. But spikes and pits are pretty obvious, so ignoring those, what are the numbers? Well, in first place, we have the sludge in all of its forms from Celeste's third chapter, Celestial Resort, which is to be expected. DougDoug as a player is generally a rather impatient one, especially if he has made progress before. On a first attempt, he'll almost clear the area completely, only to die near the end and then die 50 times consecutively to the same area because he just wants to rush back to where he was. This is something pretty common within the wide majority of the parts that he suffered on. In chapter 3 here, which is all about timing and rhythm, naturally made him really tally up those numbers like a charging bull. However, compared to the spikes, Sludge contributed nearly 5 times less deaths at 50 deaths, and just one singular death marked as not his fault. That being, of course, because this was the AI picking punishments for Celeste stream, in which Doug's challenge was to do a weird dance at each death or gift 5 subs, during which a TTS message made a joke that caused him to laugh and then distracted him. Badlin is also rather high on the list with 31 total deaths, 5 of which aren't his fault at a 16.13% blameless rate, followed by deaths caused by crushing or being crushed, such as by blocks in Mario Maker or dashing through the star blocks in Celeste, which added up to 25 deaths, 5 of which being without blame, making about 20% of deaths not his fault. The Flesh Seekers found in Chapter 5's Mirror Temple also have a decent number of deaths, amounting to about 2.3% of his total, and being not Doug's fault 23% of the time. Now, following this line of logic, what games does Doug die to the most? See, I tried to gather a decent amount of variety, but another problem is that Doug doesn't really play that many 2D platformers on stream. He mostly just plays Mario Maker, and of course I didn't want to include streams where he just plays obvious rage games, because those would obviously have a high amount of unexpected deaths, but the few times he does play with variety, it's various picks from chat, which are of course going to be ragey in nature, to play into the joke that DougDoug bad at 2D platformers and haha streamer fell, haha. But unfortunately, OmegaLol streamer fell isn't very good for the data. In fact, I could see some contention with people in regards to me including Celeste, for example, but the problem is there's just not that many games, so the options were either pretty much just do Mario games and that's it, or have some variety but then also have some games where he's going to more naturally die a bunch. But I did try to avoid outright rage games, hence why I explicitly excluded things like when he played Will You Snail. It was just like too egregiously of a you're meant to die a bunch and you dying a bunch and being bad at it is the point kind of game. As such, with me only looking at 10 VODs total, the games he played were Mario Maker 2, Spelunky 2, Celeste, Donkey Kong Country 2, Cuphead but only for like a very short brief period of time, Sequence Jump, Papa Louie When Pizza's Attack, Grapple Dog, Mario All-Stars Collection, and Silk Song. Specifically with Doug playing Mario Maker 4 times, Spelunky 3 times, and Celeste twice. Despite Celeste being played much less than Mario Maker, and with Doug rapidly playing through much more levels in general, Celeste came out on top with a total of 334 pure deaths, 280 of which were purely from the Celeste but AI Picks the Punishment stream, and 53 of which were from its brief appearance in the Grapple Dog stream, which will appear again a bit later when we talk about the biggest repeat deaths. Mario Maker, despite appearing in 4 whole streams, only had 168 pure deaths, though of course I should probably mention that one of those streams were part of the Rosa Charity Day 2 stream, where Doug played each of their favorite games on 1 life each, which included both Mario Maker and Celeste, so both those only got 1 death that whole stream. The biggest stream of that game in particular was Mario Maker But I'm Running From the Police at 85 pure deaths, followed shortly by Winning in Mario Maker Bingo That's All I Ever Do at 43 pure deaths. On the other side of the spectrum though, things get kind of interesting, because sure, Doug didn't die in like Grapple Dog or Papa Louie When Pizza's Attack, because he barely barely got far enough into these games to die due to the cutscene or just cutting off the timer early when he really shouldn't have. We have Spelunky 2, which seems to make sense given that it's a game that DougDoug has admitted to playing outside of the streams a lot, enough to be decently good at it, only playing it explicitly during the Pacifist Spelunky challenge. But Spelunky 2 has 13 pure deaths, which actually puts it at the second best performance of the fewest deaths. Because I need to be honest with you, and hold your hand while I say this, Doug is kind of cracked at Metroidvanias. See, when I first planned to do this video, I knew for certain I'd include at least one Silksong stream because Hollow Knight and Silksong are decently hard games, especially Silksong, and I had played these streams of DougDoug trying to beat Silksong in one death in the background, and had it in my mind that he died quite a few times during it. But I figured that I should, for this, watch through the final stream of DougDoug beating Silksong. I figured that in my mind this would give Doug an easier score because he'd have tried the challenge multiple times, and thus there'd be a more average number of deaths and him succeeding at the end. So you can imagine my surprise when upon rewatching the final Silksong stream, he didn't die once the entire go, and didn't even realize it. He first shot at Silksong deathless. Let me repeat that. He first shot at Silksong deathless.
Yes! Yes! Yeah! Believers! What a fucking day for the believers, dude!
Now, technically it wasn't the first shot given the 2 other streams he did, but first try picking it up on a new day is kind of mind-boggling, at least a little bit. So because there was 0 data here, I had to go back a stream. And I thought, surely he dies a bunch here. Like, I remember him dying like 6 to 8 times. 3! He only died 3 times. Now, of course, of the deaths that do happen, they are his fault. Like, here he goes in aggressively with Last Judge at half health. But, like, this is definitely something to think about. But, of course, I'm sure if you're a crazed, delirious DougDoug believer, you may take this to mean that Doug is good at 2D platformers, and that all of the other games are just bullshit, and Silksong is 2D platforming in true form. But that's not very true either, given that Mario is, like, the #1 platformer game, and he played Mario for, like, half the sample size, counting Mario All-Stars at least, and upon looking over all these other non-platforming streams, it seems to do more with the inherent difference between 2D platformers and 2D Metroidvanias. But to explain why DougDoug has better time with one over the other, let's explain this with food. Hi, this is CutCafe, where we solve problems that only I have. So, like, imagine you're a chef, right? And you're making chocolate chip cookies. And you're pretty okay at making chocolate chip cookies. And you make the dough, and as you progress with making these cookies, you get to have a few chocolate chips on the side, from the bag, and you're having a good time, right? But then the head chef comes in, and he's like, hey man, I've got an order from table 3, and they want like a loaded potato skin, and loaded potato skins are kind of maybe like cookies if you squint at it and take off your driving glasses. And then they slap down 50 potatoes and give you a bingo board. And you don't have those chocolate chips anymore to motivate you because all you have are chives now. And so you're sitting there crying with a mouthful of chives, cutting potatoes, and failing at bingo. And then there's just some guy in the corner saying you're like bald at making 2D potato formers and something about gambling. And then there's this other guy throwing $3 to your face every few seconds, yelling about Gump and Kyoto. And you're just kind of trying to hold it together, and you're making these stupid potato skins so you can go home to your dead-end apartment crying to yourself like, I am good at 2D potato formers. I swear I am. I'm good at 2D potato formers. See, Metroidvanias are all about slowly dribbling you new cool abilities that you can use over time. Like the chocolate chips you slowly get to snack on the side while you work on making them. Except instead of eating the whole bag, you have like a $60 machine that throws a chocolate chip into your mouth every time you explore the house for a new ingredient or something. Because it's with these special abilities that you are then rewarded and can then use them in these non-linear, decently open world areas that can be backtracked and explored, often rewarding you for exploration and finding secrets. Mario Maker does not do this. They just slap 50 potatoes on you, and you don't know if they're gonna have chocolate chips or not, because putting chocolate chips in a potato generally sucks, and is not very good, and you should not eat that. And with what Doug shows of his lack of patience with more traditional platformers, it's pretty clear that Doug needs to constantly feel like they're making progress in chocolate chips, rather than things like the bingo or the rapid fire levels of Mario Maker where you don't get a shiny new toy to play with. You have all the controls right from the jump, and in many levels you're just not allowed to use any of them. Or you can use them, but if you don't do it in a way 100% identical to not using it, then you get a bad Yelp review taped to your corpse and Ramsey calls you an idiot sandwich. Or just in general, it just isn't clear the exact tool they want you to jam in there. So instead instead your boss is just pelting you with potatoes and chives, and you don't even like potatoes because they lack flavor or something, then every now and then you get like a really delicious one and you assume it's because of the potato, when in reality it's not because someone slipped and put a cookie in the machine, but because of like a sweet potato casserole or a naturally sweet type of potato. You're still not getting the chocolate chips because that's not how the genre works, but it's still a kind of potato that serves that kind of palate. Of the levels that Doug actually does praise, it's the same ones that tap into that Metroidvania side of their skull, because rushing through the bag of chocolate chips makes a really bad potato. And while DougDoug's playthrough of Silksong resets on death, meaning his progress resets and he's replaying roughly the same level again, these levels are still decently free reign, and he's slowly re-given those fun keys to jingle, like dashing, gliding, grapple hook, wall jump, double jump, super jump, more options of movement which really play well into Doug's enjoyment in games that reward good smooth movement. And you could especially see this with the specific types of Mario Maker levels that have him glide through with constant movement. He's good at those levels because they encourage speeding through and rather than punishing a lack of patience like what's more typical of the platforming genre. Doug is bad at 2D platformers because he doesn't like 2D platformers. Now of course the only problem with this is if that's why he's good at Silksong but not Mario, then what's the deal with Spelunky? Especially with the pacifist challenge, that's a game that punishes going too fast and not thinking things through. A recipe that usually ends in disaster for him, as we've seen with other platformers he's played, and maybe it has to do with how many times he's played that game specifically compared to other games, or like the procedural generation, but that just feels too cop-out-ish of an answer, and unfortunately there just isn't an explainable answer outside of Doug just being good at Spelunky being an outlier in the data. So with that, I think it's about time that we finally got into the thing you've all probably been waiting for. How many times total has Doug died? Now this is your last chance to guess before I spoil the number. I'll give you a few seconds. Now then, Douglas Scott Reedon, in the course of 10 VODs, died a total of 740 times. That is a lot of dead Dougs. However, let's shear those deaths from when he got distracted or was given a bullshit level. Our pure death total brings us down to 548 deaths. With this, we can calculate that when Doug dies in the average 2D platformer, it is Doug's fault approximately 75% of the time, with only 1 in every 4 deaths being due to unfair circumstances or distractions. As such, it's safe to say that Doug is not good at 2D platformers. But is 75% bad at 2D platformers though?
I'm not killing people. I'm not doing anything crazy. Just me playing good 2D platformers. Fuck.
Yeah. But also not as hard into yes as I would have thought previously. We've got a few final things I want to talk about though, as next up we talk about our repeat deaths to find out what thing Doug repeatedly died to over and over again at, to which I've gathered the top 3 moments. To start off though, DougDoug stacked up a total of 351 repeat deaths, meaning of any death coming from DougDoug, there's a 47.3% chance it's a repeat death of a section he already died to. That's nearly a coin flip, and that's comparing it to the total of all of DougDoug's deaths too. The number 1 cause of this begins with the Grapple Dog stream during the Celeste section, in the 7th room of Dream Ultra B-side, which is probably the second worst thing to happen to him during that stream. With room 7 being near the end of B-side is a pretty okay close off to the section, especially given that for the rest of the B-side he died a total of 27 times when combining all prior rooms. However, when he gets to here, he dies repeatedly from the 2-hour 55-minute mark all the way to the 3-hour 15 mark, and for 20 minutes straight he dies 27 times in a row to the spikes alone. Reminder that this isn't counting him getting crushed, that's a separate death, and this isn't counting the sides. Those, as we established earlier, are separate deaths. I specifically mean these spikes at the bottom of these back-to-back sections. It gets so bad that he took the earlier gimmick of making his screen a silent film and reuses some old code that puts whatever he's saying on screen like those super old tiny comedies. To this room alone, Doug died 27 consecutive times, nearly double of all of the prior rooms in this B-side combined, all to just these spikes. This death is caused many times by him dashing too early, causing him to not be able to dash through the blocks and be forced to fall and die here. And while I initially counted 2 of them as intentional deaths because he was forced to, even once he's done it multiple times or almost succeeded, he just keeps brute forcing it in this way, despite the fact he should clearly know the timing by now. I even decided to boot up my own copy of Celeste, and despite having not played in nearly 6 years, when going to this room, I was able to beat this part in about 7 minutes and 30 seconds, and in just 18 deaths despite counting anything that kills me in this section, not just the spikes. Through me going back to play it, it quickly becomes apparent that DougDoug's whole problem was that he made it needlessly complicated on himself. Whereas he seems to think that he has to do a dash jump every single time when that just isn't true. Just dash into the block and hold the opposite direction plus climb and you're going to stay on it. Then the only one you have to do it for is this weird jump at the end. In fact, the part that the majority of my deaths were on were over here at the top with this gem, meaning my actual number of deaths when considering only the ones that were repeats of Doug's death was only 6. And again, I hadn't played the game in nearly 6 years. Doug had not only had the whole rest of the level to practice before this part, but he also had completed the entirety of the game only 4 months prior for their beating Celeste but if I die and AI picks the punishment video. So if I can do it as a person who's not only bad at platformers myself, but also hadn't picked up the game in 6 years, that should really tell you about Doug's capability. Oh yeah, and also before anyone comments anything, here's me pulling up the assist menu after my uncut winning run of the level so you know I didn't use it. I did it fully raw, man. I did good. Second in line for the most repeat deaths is Speak of the Devil in that very AI Doug Celeste stream, where Doug brings back AI Doug trained solely on things he said in the past to then read chat and give a punishment like 5 subs for every death or similar things. Within the stream, Doug died 14 times back to back in this bumper room found deep in chapter 6, from 3 hours and 9 minutes to 3 hours and 12. However, Doug can't blame the gimmick for holding him back or distracting him here, as the gimmick during this period was to ban or unban Flippin225 whenever he enters a room, which he of course wouldn't need to worry about until he actually passed this room. Lastly, from the Mario Maker Bingo stream, winning in Mario Maker Bingo, that's all I ever do, the on and off head bump jump from this Chinese level that translates to snowfield, day, and night dash.
I only ever miss a jump 3 times.
He dies to this 9 times, by the way. And with that, we have the last thing I tracked, that being denialism. As I mentioned earlier, denialism is anything Doug said shortly before or after dying, and in total, Doug had 272 denialisms, which I categorized into the following categories. Exclamation.
It's...
Exploring what to do.
I really need a dash. What do I press to dash? I don't think I have it yet.
Admitted fault.
Wow, that was so bad. I'm sorry for disappointing you as a new stream viewer with that horrible gameplay.
Blames the game or level.
Put blame
Why?
manager,
I don't
always
get it.
willing
I
to
don't
shell out
fucking get it.
advice,
This is
and had a
stupid.
knack for
This is a
pie
dumb
climbing
level.
pros.
It makes me feel dumb, and I'm not. I'm smart. I'm really smart, and I'm much bigger and like older and more successful than
over
the guy
the
who made that
floor.
level. I'm not dumb. I'm not an idiot.
Blames the controller.
A Joy-Con drift. That's not me. I didn't do that.
And lastly, etc. or other, for anything that I couldn't fit into the above categories.
It says Brad Pitt.
Using this information, I create a pie chart charting what Doug is most likely to say if he speaks about a death. Obviously, exclamation takes a big piece of the pie at 67 quotes, or roughly 25% of all phrases, but following that, we have Doug blaming the game at 20%, and Doug admitting fault shortly behind at 18%. Exploration, or asking chat what to do, is about 15%, then blaming the controller at 7%, and just angry and other at 6%. I also created a chart analyzing the tone of these, and found that nearly 40% of the times Doug is negative in some way.
No! I thought I just got my fucking impatient. God!
30% is neutral, 20% of the time is positive or otherwise placing blame on himself rather than the game being bad at its job, and the remaining 15% is just Doug being confused about something. So, what does all of this mean? Well, first of all, DougDoug bad at 2D platformers. Secondly, DougDoug good at Metroidvanias and schmoovin' around. Thirdly, Doug oddly thinks he's good at 2D platformers, despite the traits of the genre being the exact thing that give him so much trouble, which is kind of weird. Fourthly, I think I wasted like several days of my life going through all of this. Fifthly, something rigged. Yeah, that sounds about right. Anyways, if you liked this video, you may also enjoy my other video where I went through all of Magic the Noah's game shows to determine who he hates the most. It's a pretty similar thing to this video. Hyping is a thing now, so be sure to hype this video, like, subscribe, and tip the bellhop, my friends, because I'll be seeing you. Bye-bye!